Hi, folks. Ryan Honeyman here from Lift Economy. Many folks have come to us over the last 10 years and asked, how do I get more involved in creating an economy that works for the benefit of all life? They also ask, what skills and experiences do I need to help make this transition? So, 3 years ago, we created something called the Next Economy MBA to help address this and similar questions. Lift Economy's Next Economy MBA is an online course that's designed for entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, students, recent graduates, employees, and folks who want to learn more about transformational next economy strategies and businesses. Join the growing alumni network of nearly 250 alumni who've gone through this program and learned essential skills and hopefully built lifelong relationships for catalyzing businesses in the emergent and regenerative economy. So we encourage you to check out our course. You can go to lifteconomy.com/MBA. The next course, Cohort 7, starts on September 21st, 2021. So once again, go to www.lifteconomy.com/MBA. And now, on with the show. Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy.
So excited to be here with Nikki Silvestri, an incredible entrepreneur in this realm of next economy thinking. And what are you most excited about right now, Nikki?
Hi, everybody. As Erin said, Nikki Silvestri. A lot of my work right now is with soil carbon sequestration, and it's looking at how building healthy soil and sequestering carbon through soil can be an economic generator, especially for communities of color. And I'm also working on a couple of projects that support institutions and businesses with better understanding racial equity. And that sometimes involves direct economic development because usually they are doing some kind of wealth building in communities. But most of the time, it's just, we have these initiatives that we would like to do, and we want to learn how to play better with others. I'm also actually doing a little bit of work with my husband's organization, which has a youth entrepreneurship incubator. And so they're doing work with young African American and Latino entrepreneurs and some who are just doing workforce development, getting them to think about what kind of businesses they might want to start, and then giving them the soft and the hard skills to do it better.
If you could talk a little bit about how you're integrating this idea of carbon farming with the social entrepreneurship work that you might be doing, maybe with the youth, maybe with your economic development.
Right now, it's just a big open question. How do you do economic development while sequestering carbon in a way that could build jobs or just increase the wealth of a particular area, especially rural areas? And so I'm doing a bit of work right now with a couple of organizations that are just going to be doing some interviews and asking people questions, because right now there are cap and trade funds, some of which are supposed to be spent on communities of color, some of which are hopefully going to be going into the Healthy Soils Initiative. So there's capital present to build healthy soil. How can we use that to build economic development possibilities? There are existing pots of money in the government that are meant to do wildfire prevention, that are meant to do water systems work, all kinds of things. And those systems absolutely relate to building healthy soil, and usually healthy soil could help those things happen better. And so if there's already sources of capital that are meant to do things, could we do them more effectively and more efficiently thinking about building healthy soil? And could we create job opportunities while doing so? And could those job opportunities go to communities that have been the most impacted by climate change? I'm excited because it seems like there's a lot of agreement about the values themselves, We're just looking at the brass tacks of how to actualize those values in real time. And the players are there, the stakeholders that need to be involved in that conversation exist. We just need to talk to enough of them to be able to form a vision and a picture for how to realistically do this thing.
Could you talk a little bit about why carbon farming is important now at this time, particularly for communities of color, communities that have historically been marginalized? What is meaningful about this movement for the 99% rather than the 1%?
Yeah. You know, the more I learn about soil, the more I am deeply impressed by how much it touches our lives in ways that we might see. I used to do a lot of work with food insecurity in West Oakland, and we continuously talked about people having healthy food, having access to fresh and healthy food. And the more I learn about nutrient density of foods, the more I see that you could buy a lot of kale. And if that kale is grown in crappy soil, you could eat a lot of kale and not be getting the kind of nutrients from it that you would need to actually be healthy. But if you have healthy soil, you could spend less money. It would be way more affordable, and you would get way more calories, or not calories, but way more nutrients from that kale than you would kale that was grown in bad soil. So nutrient density of food, when talking about food insecurity, is a huge thing that touches everyone's lives. And that's a way that building healthy soil, when we're talking about health and food, is very important. But so many other things come out of soil that we generally don't think about. There's textiles, clothing textiles, and Rebecca Burgess at Fibershed likes to talk about how a lot of us wouldn't eat McDonald's, but we would wear McDonald's. And that is so real, especially for low-income communities, the kind of clothes that we're wearing and the toxins that are in the dyes that are in the process of getting that textile from out of the ground to being something that's on your body. That is a soil issue. Anything that touches dirt in the supply chain, building healthy soil would make sure that we are healthier, happier, and that the ecosystem is healthier, happier in the process. And 9 times out of 10, when industry is cutting corners, it's people of color and low-income people that end up getting the brunt of that throughout the entire supply chain.
I love how you lit upon this core theme, anything that touches dirt. And one of the things that I'm so curious about is how it comes to be that so many of our jobs nowadays are right on the computer, their office jobs, their cubicle jobs, in a time that we so critically need more people touching dirt. Can you share some thoughts on that?
One of the things that brings up for me is the urban-rural divide, that touching dirt a lot of times just means that you know where the things that you use come from. Materials, no matter what you're using, whether it's metal or plastic or anything like that, some of it is created in a laboratory. That's true, plastics and chemicals and synthetics and things like that. A lot of it isn't. A lot of it still comes out of the ground. And having a connection to where your products come from would mean that you would know a lot more about dirt, and you may interact a lot more with dirt. There's a way of talking about green jobs, jobs that are good for the people, the economy, and the planet, that really also attempts to solve the problem of human disconnection. And there was a time when we as a species were very connected to our environment as animals in a habitat. And we have sacrificed a bit of that as we've concentrated in cities. And there's a cost. There's a cost to that. And we're living some of the cost when it comes to our waste streams and pollution in the ocean and climate change and things like that. A lot of that is just disconnection and not understanding how these modern conveniences that we use every day come to us and how they're created. So for me, green jobs is seeing dignity at every step of the supply chain, including the production side, including the very beginning of where our products come from. A lot of times that's the soil. So how do we make those jobs have a lot of dignity? And how do we change the way that we value the people that are doing the foundational work in our food system, in our textile industry, and all of the industries that still require people to work with land?
You touched on this idea of higher quality food coming out of more fertile soil in the form of nutrient-dense kale. I see a connection there too with the quality of our relationships, and I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what you're looking for in terms of collaborators, and what sort of collaboration are you striving to create, especially with the point you just made about this connection to land.
My work is all about collaborators. And most of the time, my job is to think about the people that may not be talking to each other, that right now don't even think they have a reason to talk to each other, and seeing if there's a reason why they could talk to each other and what good things could come out of that. So a great example of that is this work with my husband's organization, United Roots. I've been talking to him a lot about soil carbon and how that connects at all to a 22-year-old African-American woman who is starting a business about shoes. How do those things connect, right? Do they have any kind of connection? If this young woman wants to have a deeper connection to her supply chain, is there something I could do there? Is there a way that a shepherdess who has a business with goats and sheep and grazing and hides, etc., could use some African American and Latino workers in her business who could get out of their inner city every once in a while and go not very far to engage with land in a way that is with dignity and with a lot of pride and is a really good job? And those are just the things that occur to me with my limited knowledge of these fields. But if I get a person who runs an incubator, a business incubator for young people of color, and person who builds healthy soil through grazing and wildfire prevention together to talk about how their work might intersect, that's the gold and the goods of what I do. Because then I could also run around and see, well, what policies are in place that would prevent these two people from working together? And how do I get that policy person in the conversation so that it could help these two figure out how to work better together? What are the funding streams that would exist if they come up with a project that could help them work together? Okay, we've got some government funding, we've got some private funding. Can we get these people in a room together to figure out how to support this project? I've been in economic development, I've been in climate change, I've been in food systems. There's just, my world has, and racial justice has been a common theme underneath all of that work. And so I just find myself asking questions that maybe other people are asking, but they don't know where to start in terms of answering them because they don't know the people they would need to ask to answer those questions. And I bring those people together. Collaboration is core and central to the work that I do.
And so certainly you've been a part of some very collaborative spheres in terms of your work with the Bali Fellows, your work with Piscina's Ranch and Sally Calhoun. Who are those faces that you're paying attention to, the models, the leaders?
One that comes to mind is movement generation. When we're talking about an overall frame for soil and natural resources and how that connects to people of color in urban communities, especially, movement generation's framing around that is unstoppable and just really, really good.
Can you just touch on for our listeners, who is Movement Generation and what their framework is?
Yeah, so Movement Generation is a collective organization that looks at the transition from communities being vulnerable to the impacts of climate change to communities being resilient in the face of climate change. They look at mitigation and adaptation strategies together instead of just one or the other. And they look at community power and how communities can build their own systems, and through a frame that looks at ecology, economy, and equity together, solutions that you just wouldn't have thought about that could make communities even more resilient, community building has to be core. You can't just do an economic development strategy and then say that's resiliency. And you can't just do a climate strategy and say that's resiliency. If you're not building community while doing all of that, then it's not going to work. So that's really core to movement generation. And any MG folks listening, I apologize if I got your thing wrong. So I would encourage people to go to their website. They've published a lot of papers and been a real thought leader around resiliency. Mm-hmm. So they are exciting to me. There's just, in the soil carbon world, there's a lot of people. I mean, I've been deeply impressed working with the Carbon Cycle Institute and how much they think about these things, because there is one gentleman in particular who works there who has deep ties to the environmental justice community. So he's always thinking about how to connect these dots. There are ways that environmental justice groups, communities for a better environment, urban habitat, EJ groups that have been around for a while have been thinking about these things, just maybe not in this language. And so it's really learning from them what they've already been doing that could maybe be resourced differently if they just talked about it differently. That's very exciting for me.
And I love that too, parallel within carbon farming, where, you know, I often joke all farmers are carbon farmers, right? But there's this whole new movement and energy around carbon farming. Is that because we've hit on something new, or is it because there are new funding resources out there, or is it because there's new awareness growing about our relationship with the carbon cycle?
I think we're able to better track it, honestly. I am no soil scientist, so forgive me if I get something wrong, but from the reading that I've done, it seemed like there were certain things we didn't even know were happening in terms of microbial science until like 10, 15 years ago. So there wasn't a way to actually create an economic stream because you couldn't prove causality. And now that you can prove causality in a way that you couldn't before, when it comes to if you do this in the soil, then X amount of carbon will go in there, and these are the mechanisms through which that happens. And it is by no means 100% quite yet, but it's there enough to where now you can link causality, which means that you can trigger funding streams in a way that you couldn't before. And that's pretty exciting. But no, of course it's not new. I mean, one of the things that's hard is when you have a market-based model, you get preoccupied trying to prove causality so that you can raise money, when things people have been doing for hundreds of years that have worked really well, that are more based on anecdotal data and yield data, especially if you're talking about food, that's not enough to change an industry. I'm holding a lot of questions and very curious about this. I'm still learning myself when it comes to soil carbon. I'm someone who has deep love for people and deep love for the land, who tends not to look at a lot of the science, or I haven't looked at a lot of the science. So in my learning curve, I'm just asking questions and trying to see what's possible in terms of building social systems while building ecosystems.
So in terms of those social systems, you spoke about jobs. What is the role of business?
I'm very excited thinking about business en masse, looking at being climate beneficial. There are eco products and sustainable products galore, and the industry for eco-friendly products is a huge industry. So an overlay on how eco-friendly products can actually sequester carbon, as opposed to just be carbon neutral or buy offsets, is an exciting thing for me, because that would then mean land use changes in a very big way when you're looking at building healthy soil, as opposed to just not destroying things. Being regenerative and being neutral are not the same thing.
And have you had any anecdotal experience working with businesses or ideas about future collaborative projects that you could share with our listeners?
Well, one of the reasons working with FiberShed is so exciting is that there are climate beneficial clothing practitioners that are doing really good stuff around having wool on sheep. The sheep are grazed in a really good way, which sequesters carbon in the soil. Then the wool that is sheared from those sheep goes through a process that is either carbon neutral or even better, so that the sweater that you wear sequesters carbon instead of emits carbon, sequesters carbon instead of is carbon neutral. And when it comes to fashion and clothing, that is unusual, very unusual. So what's exciting is thinking about that getting even bigger. Not-for-profits are the organizations that are doing a lot of the research right now and have the heart to keep pushing when people are not responding. A lot of philanthropists and investors are actually practitioners. I mean, I've been really impressed in the carbon soil arena of the number of people that are investors, are philanthropists who just said, I'm going to get a ranch myself and test some of this stuff. In industries where producers on the ground don't know what their market's going to be, like in clothing, right? You grow a bunch of stuff and you have no idea who's going to buy it because the brands drive that conversation. For investors and philanthropists to have some skin in the game and actually do the research and do the testing themselves on their land is incredibly exciting. And so there are roles that are shifting and morphing and being a lot less delineated than they used to be. And that's exciting to me.
Well, and I feel so grateful that you're allocating this space and time in your own world to sit with the question of how do we keep this momentum that exists right now as inclusive as possible and not let it be another movement that leaves out a tremendous proportion of our population behind.
Mm-hmm.
So gratitude for really to you for holding that space. And I'm wondering, what kind of support do you need? What help? How should other people hold that question as well, so that you're not the only one holding it?
Well, I think in real time, the reason why I focus on economic development so much is for vulnerable communities. Economic injustice is a huge, huge, huge way that marginalized communities have suffered historically. And so creating economic opportunity is a way to engage almost any community that is vulnerable to either ecological or historical circumstance. So for anybody that is working in this arena to think about, how can people make money doing this? What are the capital resources that exist or could exist to have this be an economic wealth builder? Just start there before even thinking about race or justice or any of that. And if there is an answer, if there is a way to make the value chain and the supply chain such that there are good jobs created or there are economic development opportunities beyond jobs created, then we get into the conversation about what communities are harmed the most by the existing systems in this industry that treat them poorly, and how can they be the first winners in this new system. So there's a step-by-step process, and what would help me are people thinking through that step-by-step process who find themselves in a gap somewhere in that process, either because they don't know how to create the economic development opportunities, or they don't know the communities to go to for these jobs. Because to be clear, I mean, soft skills training, working with populations that are vulnerable, it does require a different engagement when it comes to jobs and economic development. And so for people that are unfamiliar with that process, that's what I'm here for. So what I need are people that are willing to experiment and willing to engage the question and really identify concretely what are the gaps from point A to point B when it comes to creating economic development opportunities. And then we can talk about how to solve that gap.
It really sounds to me like, well, first, clearly there has to be a commitment to change. And then, like you mentioned, it's the seeking first to fund it and then seeking ways that that funding doesn't go to the typical recipient who often already gets the benefits of the way our systemic world works, but to seek pathways for that funding capital to be redirected to support communities that perhaps wouldn't otherwise have access to those types of jobs or resources. And even looking at the resource of connection to land as being an opportunity that not everyone in the urban core has access to. Can you share a little bit about your vision for this? What are some projects that maybe you're working on with Fibershed that are maybe 2, 5, 10 years out, but are exciting you and keeping you kind of persevering?
What's exciting me right now is the thought that the Healthy Soils Initiative in the state of California, or just the fact that California actually has cap and trade funds to use right now to build healthy soil, that there's a bucket of money that is going to be in the tens of millions that is all going to be used to build healthy soil. And I'm excited about the thought of the different counties in the state of California coming together to actually develop a concrete, holistic plan that bridges urban and rural, that creates economic opportunities for low-income communities, that reactivates a workforce around making California regenerative when it comes to our soil, especially considering how many specialty crops we grow. Specialty crops being not commodity crops, fruits and vegetables. And the fact that we're one of the few Mediterranean climates in the world. I mean, just California is such an interesting case study if you're looking at building healthy soil. I want us to actually push the envelope when it comes to what's possible. And it's going to require public and private coming together, and it's going to require real innovation. And that just, it excites me to think about spending the next decade redesigning how we do soil in the state.
And certainly, as a case study, that's why California has drawn, even such heroines like Vandana Shiva to the Soils Not Oils conference, because she articulated there at that conference that if California can transform our agriculture, it will set a precedent for other regions of the world to follow. So there's that leadership, and also that recognizing kind of humbly how far we have to go there in terms of certainly equity in California's agriculture fields, certainly our drought resilience in California's agriculture and polyculture systems. But yeah, I really loved how you described everything from the grassroots entrepreneurial, the entrepreneurs like Brittany Cole Bush, creating the jobs, and other entrepreneurs like Urban Roots, those entrepreneurs also stepping into that job creation realm, coupled with that holistic plan. How are you approaching piece by piece helping facilitate that holistic planning process? That sounds like a really daunting task, and I wonder if you could share some best practices.
Right now, it's just having conversations with people. That was the interview process that I described before. Building social systems can't happen well. They have to happen using the momentum that exists. Increasing momentum with people happens when you know them well enough to be able to read the signs about what folks are excited about. And so I can't just run around the state of California talking to people all my good ideas and expect things to happen. I feel like there's a critical mass. There's a moment that happens when you've talked to enough people and you have enough of the picture where their conversations with each other start to spark things that you couldn't have thought about. So this interview process is the thing that's exciting to me, because talking to environmental justice groups while talking to groups like Kiss the Ground in Los Angeles that are focused more on the media side, while talking to research institutions and philanthropists that have their own ranches, while talking to government officials, while talking to historical regenerative ag folk, while talking to people in the climate change movement. I mean, it's going to be actually looking at the landscape and looking at what's there, and then sorting the information and really building a vision for the future that's exciting to people based on their input. And once that vision can be talked about, enormous, amazing things start to happen when people are inspired. We just have to create an inspiration that actually puts equity at the center. And in order to do that, we have to have a lot of conversations.
Well, I'm so excited as you begin that process. It sounds very permaculture in its approach to observing the landscape first and foremost before taking action.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly, do you have an idea of how those interview findings are going to be shared, whether it will be at the end or during, or?
Yeah, we're not 100% sure yet.
Mm-hmm.
I think once we talk to the people we're going to be interviewing, then we'll know a lot more.
So, if there are ways that people can support you, you mentioned that they might reach out to you as a resource. How can people get in touch with you?
Through my website, silvestristrategies.com. That's where the work is held. And my personal website is nikkisilvestri.com if you want to learn a little bit more about how I talk about these issues.
Is there anything else you'd like to add for our listeners, or to summarize about what you're learning right now, or what any follow-on thoughts from this conversation?
You know, I want to emphasize that I don't know the answers to these questions. I'm asking them. And for anyone who feels daunted by encountering a question, like, I've talked to a few ranchers who were just a little freaked out by the question of justice at all, because there aren't very many people of color in certain rural areas. How do we even think about this? And I don't want the question to occur to people as being a judgment off the bat. These are really hard things to talk about a lot of times. And creating the space to ask questions is incredibly important, especially in a movement where there's so much opportunity. So I would just encourage people to breathe into what you're doing well first. Make sure that you're celebrating your successes, no matter how small, because that's going to create a better and bigger space to engage the tougher questions about how to get better.
That's a great one. Breathing always helps. Are there other ways that you've found that make asking this question easier for people?
The knowledge that we're all in this together and having fun. Having a lot of fun. One of my favorite music videos is Boys Round Here, because it's a country song. And what is his name? What's that dude's name? The guy
I've never seen it. I'll have to.
Blake Shelton, that is his name. Boys in this music video. It's a country song, and he's got these black dudes in a lowrider coming to a hoedown in the music video. And I remember seeing this, thinking, see, this mix of hood and country right here is exactly what I'm talking about. There are ways that if we dance together and play together and value each other as people first, it makes having conversations that are hard a lot easier. So just start with relationship. Like, especially if you don't know where to start with, how you doing? How many kids do you have? What kind of music do you listen to? Like, there's a way to make the work of building a better economy relationship-based and fun. And if it is, it creates a much stronger foundation for initiatives to fly.
I love that you bring that up, because I think sometimes we do let our structures change the way we interact with people. And at the end of the day, people are people.
Mm-hmm.
So to be real with that. Well, thank you so much, Nikki. Thank you for taking the time and sharing authentically what's up for you. I really am so grateful for your humility to acknowledge that you're still in many questions around this, and we all are. And I think that that's the power of this movement, particularly around carbon farming, around carbon sequestration. You know, the leadership that the Marin Carbon Project and the Carbon Cycle Institute has taken has certainly leapt us forward as a movement in terms of the metrics. And you'll talk to any other soil scientist, you're among the soil scientists that are saying, we honestly have so much to learn about how soil carbon gets built and carbon gets sequestered in our soils. So thank you for bringing in not just that question of carbon sequestration, but people care through planet care.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.